Hey gamers, this is part 2 of my Final Fantasy XIV Ultimate Ironman. To refresh up on the rules, this means no market boards, no extra storage like Chocobo Bag or retainers, no grouping unless I absolutely have to, and no buying from NPCs unless the items are important and unobtainable otherwise. In the last episode, I managed to solo both Sastasha and Tamtara Deepcraft as an archer. Before starting this episode, I was talking with a friend of mine to theorycraft the beginning of the game. It always leads back to the inspection quest, which, not including the fact that I originally bought items for it, the way I ended up doing it again to try to redeem myself was to use the quest reward Botanist offhand to create the leather eye patch. After doing some digging in-game and on Rad's Games channel, it was found that there is actually one hat that both completes the inspection quest and keeps the Ironman pure. You wouldn't expect it, but the helmet is the brass circlet, specifically the lapis lazuli one. It is important to note that this can only be done if you do not pick to start in Limsa Lominsa, as you cannot leave Lanoshka to get goldsmith and miner. All the materials needed for the circlet do not require any offhands, the sledgehammer for miner and the offhand for goldsmith. The first step is to rush to Ul'dah to unlock both goldsmith and miner, get them both to about 25 and mine copper and zinc for brass ingots, then go to the shroud to mine raw lapis to create the lapis lazuli. With the 3 brass ingots and the 1 lapis, you can then craft a level 18 hat to complete the inspection quest with. Oh, I forgot to mention that you need to get any class to level 18 to actually equip it. My Ironman may not be 100% pure because of the first hour, but following this method and using my footsteps after, your Ironman can remain more pure than mine. Anyway, now on to the actual video. We continue the journey immediately after the last episode ended. Because I don't want a repeat of Tamtara, I don't want to rush headstrong and try to brute force my way through Copperbell Mines. I want to try to get some upgrades to ensure the run goes smoothly. To not surprise anyone, I spend the next 2.5 hours to crafting and gathering. I collect silver to upgrade my jewelry with goldsmith for my crafters, and while I'm here I progress the archer class quest. I also grab some extravagant water so I can make a few pairs of glasses, both for glams purposes, gear purposes, and actually to level my alchemist. I run all the way to the bottom of South Thanalan, grabbing all the aetherites on the way. I came down here to mine Celix, a material used for the glasses I was just talking about, and proceed to make an absolute ridiculous amount of crafter and gatherer upgrades. I collect all kinds of different logs and turn them into lumber and attempt to level carpenter, and this allows me to finally make a shiny new bow. More and more and more crafting later, I feel like it's finally time to start the next dungeon. Copperbell Mines, the next dungeon. Blazing through this dungeon when doing content normally, all I remember is that the new changes they did in the beginning of Endwalker, the bosses cast like crazy, meaning that I was predicting that bosses shouldn't auto all that much. Because of this, I felt very confident going into this dungeon, a complete contrast to how I felt in Tamtara. After clearing the first room and going down the elevator, I die for the first time due to lag. Over the course of this entire dungeon, I lag like crazy. The smart thing to do would have been to quit early on and try again when I'm not lagging, but I'm stubborn. I have a funny idea from playing Souls games to see if I can send the elevator up without me having to be on it, and to my surprise it does actually work. I continue clearing, lagging and dying even more, all the way to the first boss, Kotos. Upon pulling, I get worried because Kotos immediately starts out with hitting me with a tank buster, doing a lot of my health. Going forward, almost every boss will just be an ongoing war of attrition. The boss has multiple cast bars, the first one being an ability called Lumbering Leap. This ability places 3 gigantic AoE circles on the ground that go off one by one in the order that they spawn. The boss is completely distracted doing this and does not auto. Upon landing the 3rd time, he will cast a baited AoE called Colossal Slam. He also has another cast called Catapult, a non-threatening ranged attack. Because this boss spends most of his time casting AoEs that are near impossible to get hit by, he goes down with no issues. One quick room later and it was off to the next boss, the Icarus Ire. This boss does 3 things: a tank buster called Fluid Spread, a pathetic AoE called Syrup, and upon hitting specific health totals, Divide. Divide, as the name suggests, is an attack where the boss splits itself into small versions that explode after a short duration. Even though this boss does not do a whole lot, the auto attacks on their own do a lot of damage and I get really close to dying. Near the end of the fight, the game decides that it wants me to restart, but somehow, despite lagging, I somehow pull through killing the boss. I am really hating this running thing of close calls upon every boss encounter. More shooting and clearing later, it's off to the last boss of Copperbell Mines, Girgis the Great. This boss is very similar to the last two. Hits very hard, has a tank buster, and spends 90% of its time casting. What would normally have been a joke of a fight is really annoying because during the fight multiple times I DC and the boss kills me. To prove how easy this boss really is, for added glory I never once hit the second wind button over the duration. After a short fight and not lagging, I was victorious. Copperbell Mines has been soloed as an archer. From here on out, I will not be mentioning the coffers I open from the bosses because the gear is mostly useless and not even worth using. After a little more MSQ, the lag is still unbearable and I call it for the day. Back to MSQ, I am sent out to investigate my first primal, Ifrit. After doing the first half of Camp Drybones, I got a quest reward for Vesper Bay tickets. They added these when they did the revamp for Realm Reborn a while ago. I immediately trashed them. There was a great way to get to the Waking Sands that does not involve teleporting to Horizon and doing that super long run. You can teleport to Limsa, then go to the Arcanist Guild, and here there's an NPC literally dedicated to teleporting you to Vesper Bay. Once flying is unlocked later, it is most definitely a much faster method, but until then this will be my mode of transportation to the Waking Sands. Once back, I am told to go over to the spot you go to unlock materia melding. Here I unlock overmelding. I'm not quite sure how it'll be useful yet, but I'm curious to see. Before going back to Camp Drybones, I see that the quest for Halatali is available, an optional dungeon that I can grab later. Before challenging Halatali or Ifrit, I finally, after all this time, go to upgrade my bracelet using Toto-Rak. I do hunting log till 28 so I can equip the bracelet, I unlock Ifrit, and then decide that I actually want to try Halatali first. I run over, unlock it, and make some raid food before jumping inside. It's time for Halatali, the first of many optional dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. This is overall a pretty unremarkable dungeon, even solo, aside from one boss. Clearing through the trash between bosses is never worth mentioning. It's always the same kiting strategy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The first boss is Firemane, a fire sprite. This is another caster boss, meaning it'll be a huge pain. During the first attempt, I line of sight the fire cast by using this pillar. At certain HP thresholds, the little fire ads will start spawning and move towards the middle of the arena. Once it reaches the big bonfire in the middle, it'll explode, doing a bit of chip damage. Considering I am already struggling a bit with the boss's auto attacks, I don't have time to worry about this ad damage. To the best of my ability, I attempt to both line of sight the boss and target down these ads at the same time. After a bit of struggling, I die. The very next attempt, I take the boss to the same pillar, but notice the boss can hit me and I can shoot through the pillar. Confused, I attempt to run around a room looking for possible things to line of sight. All of the pillars are actually lies. The boss is still able to hit me. I keep thinking, why did the pillar work on the first try? After a lot of trial and error, I deduce that it's not actually the pillars that are line of sighting, but these armor stands. You truly learn something new every day. Using this new knowledge, I use the armor stands around the room to both line of sight and move around to target down the ads. I killed the boss soon after this armor stand discovery. To give an idea of how easy this dungeon is, this boss was half the runtime. After some mobs that hit uncomfortably hard, it was time for the next boss, the Thunderclap Gulvry. This is another boss on the list of the unremarkable ones. All this boss does is slowly chase you and at certain HP thresholds goes to the middle of the tiny body of water in the arena and starts spawning thunder sprites. I target down the thunder sprites and after a few times of doing this, it goes down. This dungeon has been pretty boring and the final boss, Tangata, is no exception. This boss autos like once every millennia, and after it autos once, it telegraphs an AoE right in front of it. Much like the first boss, at certain HP thresholds, it'll start spawning ads, but instead of them moving towards a bonfire in the middle and exploding, it goes to the boss and explodes upon touching it. Even with me accidentally guiding ads into the boss while killing them, it goes down with absolutely no issues. Halatali has been conquered and is by far the easiest dungeon so far. Halatali out of the way, it's now time for the fight everyone's been waiting for. Ifrit is the first of many primals I must face on my journey. I first zone in with all my normal restrictions on, minimum item level and level sync, with no echo. This version of Ifrit is meant for 4 people, so I have high hopes that this shouldn't be too difficult. The first few pulls don't get super far. I just feel it out, trying the same thing as I normally do. Run around in circles and kite the boss. Ifrit's autos hit hard and hit very often. He also repeatedly hits me with an untelegraphed tank buster, Incinerate, which does high damage, doing roughly 40% of my HP every single time. I discovered that blinding potions actually work, but I'm not sure how much of a game changer this actually is. It helps with the auto attacks, but does not help with Incinerate, which was what I was hoping for it to do. Attempt after attempt, my furthest attempt gets to around 47%. When Ifrit gets to sub 50%, he spawns a nail ad in the middle that must be targeted and killed. After trying again and again, trying different things to see if I can win this game of inches. I even try running around in circles to see if I can dodge Incinerate. This absolutely does not work, and Ifrit autos more often since I'm not running. With the way my health is right now, I can barely not out-heal the damage Ifrit is inflicting upon me. So I get the idea to zone out and only turn off min item level. This is only a difference of about 3 levels. Doing this worked almost too well. Getting these few extra levels gives me enough vitality to barely out-heal all of the damage Ifrit inflicts onto me. I get to the point where I kill the nail, and Ifrit jumps up to do his big ultimate attack. Seeing that I'm not at 100% health, I assume that I'm just dead, and to my surprise I'm not. As Ifrit's health gets smaller and smaller, he starts doing more actions. Like instead of auto-attacking, he starts throwing out eruptions, which are telegraphed AoEs that can easily be dodged. After a few minutes of this, Ifrit is down. I would have said this was the first real test of this challenge, but Galvanth the Dominator from Tamtara really made me think that I was not going to be able to continue on an Archer. I'm sure everyone is shocked that I didn't really have much trouble with Ifrit. It even surprised me. Now with these 2 distractions gone, I can return to the real content. I go back to the Waking Sands, and upon arriving, I am now granted the option to pick between 3 Grand Companies. All 3 of these Grand Companies are themed after the major cities. The Immortal Flames for Ul'dah.
Hark you, souls of flame, drawn to the bosom of the desert, where the fire burns brightest and shall rage forevermore. Hurrah! Rauban!
The Twin Adders for Gridania.
Our forebears were once strangers in...
And the Maelstrom for Limsa.
Brothers and sisters of the sea, hearken unto me.
To my memory, the only thing that really matters is the distance from the Aetheryte to the actual Grand Company Quartermaster. I usually always settle on the Immortal Flames because the Nanamo Rauban thing is always hilarious.
Rauban?
After unlocking the Grand Company, I see something I completely forgot even existed. The Grand Company Delivery Missions. These are a set of daily tasks to turn in specific items from either crafting it or gathering a certain amount. I turn in what I have on hand and get a lot of company seals out of it. I was planning on needing to do fates for these seals, so this works out perfectly. With the seals, I can now finally, after all this time, get a mount. Gone are the days of needing to run around literally everywhere on foot. Now that I'm here looking at my chocobo, I wonder how masochistic am I really feeling? Because on one hand, this chocobo is a quest reward, but on the other hand, does it really matter? Do I need to be that strict? I sit on this question for a while. I think to myself while looking up every mount in the game. There are technically 2 mounts that I can obtain reasonably without using the chocobo or the achievement vendor in Gridania, both of which are from Palace of the Dead, an instance I will inevitably need to do at some point. Until I settle on the idea in my head, I will use the mount I buy from the achievement vendor because it feels a little better. I choose to name my chocobo Swolo, as both a reference to my character's name and an old inside joke about me and my friends. The MSQ takes me back to Gridania, where I see a bunch of new plus quests. These quests all have some kind of unlock behind them. I'd run around doing the simple ones, one of them leveling me up to level 30. I'd then notice one of them is way more important than the others. I forgot how early you actually unlock Palace of the Dead. With this quest accepted, at some point I can divert all of my time into progressing this deep dungeon. There are a lot of essential items I will one day need that come from this. Now that I hit level 30, I can now unlock one of Archer's main unlocks, becoming a bard. I go back to do the heaps of Archer quests I have stacked up, having a really easy time, because I am technically overgeared for all of them. After about 30 minutes, I have bard unlocked. The abilities and benefits to becoming a bard does not really come into play because the dungeons ahead of me are all below level 30. Did you know for any quest rewards that involve you doing a specific emote, you can skip the animation of your character doing the emote by auto-walking when you hit the button to do the action. After a lot of busy work, I finally have the next dungeon unlocked, the 1000 Maws of Toto-Rak. Before this, you'll never guess what I have to do first. I gather more aluminum because I need it to make toad leather, the main material needed for my next set of gear upgrades for both my archer and my craft. I create the last of the flowrite and silver jewelry I needed, and I unlock decent thing. Whenever I get a crafter to 30, any item that is made using that crafter can be broken down into raw materials. In some circumstances, there are items I can only get from decent thing. I go north of Vesper Bay to farm toad skin for the previously mentioned toad leather. I spend about 20 minutes gathering diorite, snoo, and web. Then, just like the last episode, I spend over an hour just sitting in one room, making as much crafting and gathering gear I can possibly make. I do more of the Grand Company deliveries to level up my carpenter, and with this I can now make a new bow. With the bow, there's only one piece of gear I need left to upgrade for my archer, and it's a helm. To craft this eye patch, I need a single thing of hippogriff snoo. I ride all the way to the top left of Kurthis Central Highlands and get the snoo upon killing the first mob. I get bard to 33 so I can actually equip it, then restock up my high potions. With all of this done, there's only one last piece of the puzzle that remains. I need some kind of okay raid food. I've spent so much time prepping for this dungeon that the food I'll settle on won't be anything spectacular. I experiment doing culinary and leave quests. I complete 2 of them, then completely nope out of the 3rd one. I choose grilled warm water trout to be my food. It's overall okay, and it's XP for Fisher. New armor, pots, and food in hand, I decide it's finally time to take a break from crafting and do the next dungeon. The 1000 Maws of Toto-Rak. This dungeon marks the 5th dungeon I will be crawling through. Upon starting, I immediately see that this dungeon will be slightly different than the others. The basic trash mobs hit extremely hard, and the ranged mobs are really scary. The first boss is the Corla o' Ninetails, which is technically the first 2 bosses. This first fight isn't anything super special aside from the fact that it constantly re-ups a poison dot, which deals damage even when the boss is not autoing me. This first attempt gets to around 28%, so it's very much doable. For some reason, unlike the last few dungeons, these bosses can actually be binded. This gives me precious seconds to wait for my healing pots to come off cooldown. It goes down after a few tries. This did not bode well for the rest of the dungeon if these mobs hit this hard. Not much between the 2 bosses, it was immediately time for the rematch. Like true Realm Reborn fashion, this boss is exactly the same as the first, but it spawns 2 adds that are not remarkable aside from the fact they also up a poison debuff that stacks. With proper healing management and debuff management on the boss, it goes down with no issues. The clear from here to the last boss was a crawl. Any pack with a ranged mob was trouble. This set of 2 puddings and a lightning sprite gave me a lot of trouble. Because I was conditioned really early on when I originally played 14, I was conditioned to skip boss intro cutscenes. I had absolutely no idea that La Habrea's first introduction to the player was the boss cutscene for this dungeon. Cutscene over, it was time for the final boss, Grafias. This giant dynamite was easier than it looked. Any boss that wastes time casting instead of autoing always seems doable. This boss drops baited AoEs on players that eventually explode and cast Silkscreen, a simple line AoE with a quick cast bar. Much like the other bosses, at certain HP totals it'll start spawning dynamite ads. These ads do not do anything special aside from doing a lot of auto attack damage. Eventually, the boss's tail will become targetable, and upon breaking the tail, the boss will intake increased damage. There is nothing new past this point, so after more kiting, the boss goes down. A decent amount of progress has been made so far in the solo journey, but there is way more to come. Can't wait to see what challenges await me next. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.